Welcome to our podcast of Roots and Hoots. I'm your host, Gordon Spence of the Legacy of Hope Foundation. Our guest today is Albert Beck. Albert is Métis. He enjoys volunteering, sewing, beading, writing, working on his university degree, spending time with his husband, Dr. J. Craig Phillips, and his family. Albert has spent much of his life as a human rights defender, fighting the inequities that affect the rights of all Indigenous peoples in Canada. Albert now spends his professional and personal time advancing Métis Nation two-spiritness, Métis child welfare and health promotion initiatives at the national and international level. Today's podcast is going to be focused on the 60s Scoop, and Albert was a survivor or is a survivor of that time period. Before I ask Albert to talk about his experiences, I'm going to read a bit from an article that was published in June 2016 by Nigan Widam, James Sinclair, Sharon Daynard. The 60s Scoop refers to the large-scale removal of, or scooping, I quote, unquote, of Indigenous children from their homes, communities, and families of birth through the 1960s, and their subsequent adoption into predominantly non-Indigenous middle-class families across the United States and Canada. This experience left many adoptees with a lost sense of a cultural identity. The physical and emotional separations from their birth families continues to affect adult adoptees and Indigenous communities to this day. The 60s Scoop was not an isolated event propelled by inferior Indigenous parenting, but rather an extension of paternalistic policies in Canada that sought the assimilation of Indigenous cultures and communities. The process began in 1951 when amendments to the Indian Act gave the provinces jurisdiction over Indigenous child welfare where none existed. From the 1960s to the 1980s, provincial governments considered the removal of Indigenous children the fastest and easiest way of addressing Indigenous child welfare issues. In many cases, the child welfare system did not expect or require its social workers to have specific knowledge about or training in Indigenous child welfare. They also did not have to seek the consent of communities to scoop newborn and young children from their parents and place them into non-Indigenous homes. It was only until the Child, Family, and Community Service Act in 1980 that social workers were required to notify band councils of a child's removal from the community. And my guest today is Albert Beck. He is one of the survivors from that period. Albert, maybe you can just talk a little bit about how this began for you and where it took you. Maybe start with your family and where you come from.
Thanks, Gordon. I just want to first thank the Legacy of Hope for doing this important work. I think sharing knowledge on different topics is really important, and I'm just really grateful to be here. So, Tanshe, like you said, my name is Albert Beck, and I'm a citizen of the Métis Nation, and my roots come from the historic Red River settlement, which is in Winnipeg. I'm the second oldest of 5 children, and I was born in St. Rose de Lac. I come from a small Métis settlement called Crane River. It's about 300 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg, and it's on the shores of Lake Manitoba. I'm a citizen, a member of the Manitoba Métis Federation, and I live and work in Ottawa and been there for a number of years. I'm a senior policy analyst for the Métis National Council, and my key files are the 60s Scoop and the Métis Veterans File. For the 60s Scoop, I'm the advisor to the Métis National Council's minister responsible for 60s Scoop, Vice President David Chartrand, who also happens to be the president of the Manitoba Métis Federation, again, my home province, and a really good leader. So sort of my story begins at being apprehended at birth in St. Rose de Lac. I came from a Métis family that lived in poverty, but was strong in family connections. But through the interactions in the hospital, the social workers became involved in the apprehension process. And so I lost my traditional language and culture as a Métis citizen. Had I grown up in my family, I would have spoken Soto, which is my mother's tongue. I grew up in a Ukrainian family and I was taught the Ukrainian culture, lived in isolation and in a state of confusion throughout most of my child and youth and adolescent life and early childhood. I became addicted to alcohol. I was using alcohol to sort of numb all the pain and anguish that I suffered. I went through a number of hospital stays as a result of trying to commit suicide, and just simply because I was very, very lost. I came out as a two-spirited person during the AIDS epidemic, and so, along with the loss of my family and dealing with the traumas around that, I was utilizing alcohol and drugs, and also ended up with HIV. So I ended up coming into the Indigenous community through an Aboriginal AIDS service organization, and through that process, I began to learn First Nations culture. I didn't really learn much about Métis, but the avenue, that road led me on my way home, and I repatriated back with my birth family in 1997. So that has been sort of it was a big learning curve for me, dealing with a health condition, dealing with addictions, and dealing with trauma. And it took a number of years to heal from those afflictions that were not my own, that many survivors actually take on themselves. And so I had to learn my culture, and I began to do that. I began working at the Métis National Council. I actually moved from Winnipeg I was moving around a lot, and I moved to Vancouver and ended up with an opportunity in Ottawa and stayed there. And I ended up working for the Métis National Council. I started there in 1999. So just a couple of years after I came home, I worked for the national office. And there I learned about my culture mainly through the Métis women, the political leaders, and the elders. And I learned a lot about where I came from and around the cultural and language. And that also brought me home a lot through my travels back and forth. And so I began to spend a lot of time with my birth family. And that was a difficult process to reintegrate back into the family. And so it took it's still in progress. I've been and since COVID, I've been in Winnipeg for the last 3 months. I'd lost my brother through suicide in February. And so I sort of been home, and it's really, sort of solidified or brought us closer together as a family. And so I feel things have been a bit tough, but I've been the repatriation process has been an ongoing process. It's really something that continues to evolve on a daily basis. And so that sort of has led me to the work that I do on the 60s Scoop.
What led to you being scooped up? How did that happen?
Well, there was some information. I did an information request for most provinces, those that have been adopted. Foster care seems to be a problem accessing records, but for those that were adopted, the province of Manitoba passed legislation to allow those adoptees to access their records. And the records really are just the birth records, not necessarily everything that's contained or the dossier that has all the notes and information about your stay within the child welfare system. And you have to actually do that through, you have to write to CFS, Child Family Services, and ask specific questions. And so I was able to get a little bit of an overview. And basically, their rationale for apprehension was neglect. Upon repatriation with my family, they even said that my mother had actually signed adoption papers to put me up for adoption, but based on based on our communications with each other, our talking with one another, I learned that they had gone to the courts to try to get me, and actually have a younger brother that was also scooped, and tried to get that process and get us home. But the courts made it so difficult for our family. They were young, and they were required to have a house, and my dad was supposed to have a job. And so that really just didn't play out very well. And so I think I remember my mom telling me that she was one of the last meetings was she had brought my baby clothes. She was expecting actually baby clothes, and she was expecting to bring us home, and that never really happened. And that's when everything was finalized. But the papers had mentioned that my mom had signed, my birth mother had signed adoption to release me, to give me up for adoption. She never did, and I've been trying to get access to those records so I could see, because we would know the handwriting, whoever signed it. We could have that analyzed. My mother and I are both left-handed, so we would be able to tell if someone right-handed, because most people are right-handed. We would be able to tell if she signed those papers or not. There's there's still a lot of questions around why. In fact, we haven't really ever received a proper why. My mother has never received a response on why these children were taken away. We know from some of the research that's being done and some anecdotal information that's being shared, that this was part of the colonial constructs and processes that the Crown was involved in relation to accessing our Indigenous lands. And by doing that, they went after the children. And so, the Crown, or the Canadian government, or the state, committed gender-based violence against Indigenous women, to thousands of Indigenous women, and of course, this is all part of the colonization and accessing our natural resources and lands. So we can look at it from sort of a broader prospect, but I think it was part of the plan, overall plan, I believe, and it was to assimilate Indigenous children into mainstream society. And so, as a 60 Scoop survivor, they succeeded.
So they could have made up any kind of excuse, really. I mean, it was actually a systematic approach to colonize Native children.
Well, I mean, it was something that they created. They created the reserves. And right beside the reserves were Métis settlements. They created the Indian Act. They created different legislation and schools that were aimed at assimilating Indigenous people. It was all part of a master plan to assimilate people, or Indigenous people. And so this was something that I believe was always intended and always was being manufactured to basically remove our indigeneity from who we are and our rights.
Was it just you, or did you said you had a brother who recently passed away? Was he with you? Did he get scooped as well?
No. So this is the funny thing. It's, well, not funny. I shouldn't say funny, but I think this is one of the things that I always we question, is that my mother had a son. His name was Conrad Beck. That was my older brother who left us in February, and then there was myself and my younger brother Michael, and then I have actually a sister and two sisters, and they didn't take Conrad, but they took me and Michael, and they were actually on their way to taking my sister. And so my grandparents stepped in and actually had to literally go into the hospital and steal my sister and get her out of the hospital and to the home. And actually the social worker actually came to the house, and my grandfather basically said, "You need to leave. You've already taken enough from us. We can take care of our own." And so those children, my older brother and my sister, stayed within the family while myself and my other brother were scooped. And so we come from the same family, but one of my younger brother's not really connected to our family. Then there's me that's connected. And so our family is very fragmented. Even though we are together, it's a bit fragmented. The loss of my brother just created another like fragment, another loss. So yeah, it's been difficult. And these repatriation processes, when we came home, there was these huge information gap and experience gaps that we will never ever get when they talk about my grandfather or my granny or my uncles and great uncles and all those members. I don't have a place to put it. In fact, if I want to see what my family structure looks like, I have to look at a genealogy to sort of figure things out. But we don't have anything to connect them to and be able to sort of put a face to those names of those individuals. So I think there is this huge gap and loss of not only culture and language, but we've lost our kinship knowledge of where we come from. So it's just sometimes it's very artificial. I live in Manitoba. I've lived in Manitoba for my upbringing. We both lived probably, I think Michael probably lived like an hour away from our community, and I lived about 8 or 9 hours. I grew up in northern Manitoba. And so we were always close to our home, but we were never home. And so coming home, it still feels that way in some ways.
Where did you grow up? Like what town?
I grew up in Nepal, Manitoba. Actually, we moved a couple of places, but more specifically, we stayed put in Nepal. I grew up. I started in Cranberry Portage, and my adopted parents, my adopted father worked in construction, and then ended up working for the Department of Highways in Manitoba. So we stayed in Nepal until I graduated, and then I moved to the city.
Talk a little bit about your adopted parents. How was that? How long did you live with them for?
Well, my relationship with my adopted parents has been estranged for over 30 years. Sort of throughout at my younger ages, I was actually told I was adopted at about, I think I was in kindergarten or grade 1, I think. So I was told at a very young age, and that instilled in me it shattered my world, but I understood at a very young age that I didn't belong and I needed to go find my family.
How did it feel when you first heard that?
Well, I felt very shattered. It shattered my world as a little child. I had to deal with a big thing. What I thought was the truth was not the truth, and so the parental relationship was severed. And so I basically lived in a space, in a home where I felt disconnected. And so it caused it was traumatic. And so without having any supports or any kind of counseling, it set forth a trajectory where our relationship was so toxic that I actually started to run away at around 16. And I've been I'm reading a lot of 60 Scoop survivor stories, and this is not unusual for the adopted family unit to begin to break down. It can be at any age, but usually around a time when we start to realize who we are or what's going on in our early teens, we start to run away. And this is something that we see happening in the child welfare system, where we have our young girls running away, or you see all these amber alerts going on, and we see children running. It's because these relationships have broken down, because we know that we don't belong there and we need to get home. And so the relationship was so toxic that I severed ties with them, and I moved out. I went out on my own very early, and of course, with the trauma, the drinking, and the alcohol, I was basically surviving. I lived out on the streets, and for I think a summer when I first moved to Winnipeg, and it was just really, really rough. Not really getting a lot of support from anybody. And so, so I haven't spoken to them in over 30 years. I do keep in contact with all the other family, because now I sort of have come to a conclusion or understanding of why I was the way I was. But it's really difficult to sort of explain it to them now, because they're in their close to their 80s now. It's just something I don't feel is really necessary.
You don't talk to them anymore?
No, we don't talk.
Have you been back to Crane River?
Yes, actually, it's funny. I went back. My husband and I took a trip there for the first time last Easter. Actually, it'll be about just a little over a year when we went home, and that to me was a very emotional trip. I felt like I was meeting my birth family for the first time, and just going home was very emotional for me, just to be where my family and ancestors lived and walked. And it was a very spiritual, very connecting, and I understood some of the reasons why I am sort of the way I am. I love the water, I love camping, I love being outdoors, and the community of Crane River is very, very small. It's right beside Crane River First Nations community, so they're very linked together. I have lots of family that live in Ebb and Flow First Nations, and so the families are very connected. But just going there and being on the lake, close to I went on the shores of the lake, and it was just beautiful, and I just felt very connected for the very first time in terms of just feeling like I was home, and just having that first time. And I was home. Remember, I came home in 1997. It took me a long time to finally get to wearing my traditional homestead, and so it was very, very emotional and very satisfying. And I met some of my family members that are still living there, and some cousins. And I went to the graveyard. So I met most of my family in the graveyard. So my aunts and uncles and my grannies and grandpas are all buried in the cemetery in Crane River. So I was able to pay my respects, and I was lucky enough to have my cousin there, and she was telling me stories of all these people. So it was a family member. So it was really nice.
Must have been a tremendous relief for you, a sense of relief after going there and seeing all your relatives and finally coming to terms with what happened to you and coming home in a sense.
Yeah, it was a sense of happiness, but also a sense of sadness, because still, when you think about it, the loss of these losses, I knew I had lost some loss, but I didn't realize how much I really did lose. And when we think about, all the stuff that's going on, the litigation, the compensation programs, and whatever limited services that are going to be available through the First Nations and Inuit compensation package will not compare to the loss that survivors have gone through. With the Métis Nation, we're still in last year, I think there was 5 class actions leveled against the federal government. And so that is in the courts in, I think, an appeal for carriage. But the Métis National Council, where I'm at, has been working at negotiating a settlement agreement without going into the courts. But because of what's going on now, things are sort of not up in the air, but the Métis Nation is still trying to do some stuff, but it's been limited in its ability to sit down with the federal government. So it's been frustrating as a survivor, and trying to provide some supports and some healing supports for Métis Nation citizens. We did consultations with over 200 Métis 60 Scoop survivors from across the Métis homeland, so Ontario to British Columbia, and we heard what they wanted and what they needed. And so we worked really hard at, utilizing what we heard. We created a report, what we heard report, and we're using that as the platform negotiations. And so it's frustrating because we can't really do a lot right now because things are not moving along, but the pain and suffering still happens. And now that we're in the COVID-19 era, where people are forced to stay home, this has probably added more stress and anxiety to all survivors.
In the same article that I'm referring to, research suggests upwards of more than 20,000 kids were taken from their homes, and these include First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children. And many were also sent abroad, some as far away as New Zealand. And in 1981 alone, 45 to 55% of children were adopted by American families. Now, that's a tremendous amount of kids that were removed from their families. I'm just wondering out loud, I wonder how many of those are still out there trying to find some sort of repatriation.
Well, I wouldn't even try to figure that out. And the reason why I say that is I think the number is an underestimation. And so I think there's a lot more. I have met a Métis survivor from New Zealand, and I've met some from that were taken to England, and I've met many from the United States. In fact, we've been able to I've been able to keep in contact with many of them, but a lot of why I'm saying that's unestimated, or if they're ever going to make it home, is because some of them don't even know that they were even adopted. If they are adopted and they find out that they're adopted, some can't even get home because their identity has been changed and their nationality has been changed, or they are so traumatized from the experience that they never made it. And I believe that there are thousands of 60s Scoop survivors that have passed away because of the trauma being removed from their environment and put into a foreign environment. So, yeah, I think there's a lot, and I say that with great sadness because there's so much potential, so much human potential lost. Our artists and our program people and our lawyers and our warriors and our fighters, all this has been lost. And part of the rationale around taking Indigenous children and putting them into non-Indigenous families was to help them so they could succeed, and that never ever amounted to a hill of beans. So we were actually put in more danger. So I think the number is underestimated, and I believe there's many of them that are never going to make it home.
Oh, that's amazing. 20,000 plus kids.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of lives.
Yeah, it is.
That's a lot of mothers who walked into a hospital and gave birth and walked out without their child. Put that into perspective.
Forced to give up their children.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about your family name. I think it's Morso. Did you want to go by Morso at one time? Is that your original family name, or is it Beck?
Well, actually, so this is the identity crisis that many of us have gone through. In fact, when I was thinking about this, I had a Ukrainian last name and first and middle and last name. And then when I came home, I changed it. I kept my first name and I changed my middle name to my birth name, and I took on my parents' last name. So my father is a Morso and my dad is a Beck. But I decided, it was probably in 2018, had a national 60 Scoop, Métis 60 Scoop symposium that I was going to go back to the name that was given to me at birth. And so my name on my original birth certificate is Albert Beck. So I began the process of doing the paperwork to make those changes to account and bring myself back to where and who I was. I think in the early stages, I had changed my name in haste because I was just so excited to be home and be the person that I was supposed to be, but over the number of years and through different experiences and so forth. And trying to go back to the beginning or to where things should have been and return things back to the way they are. My goal was to basically take on the birth name. And it's my next step that I will be doing is working towards finding a mechanism through legal process to basically divorce from my adoption. So that everything because my name is still, my birth parents aren't on my birth certificate. It's still the adopted parents. So I need to have that all removed and brought back to the original birth certificate with the names of my family on it.
You're also in our one of our exhibits called Bigiwen. meaning coming home, truth-telling on the 60s Scoop. And that term was coined by Patrick Johnson, author of the 1983 report, Native Children and the Child Welfare System, and then that exhibit is with the Legacy of Hope Foundation, and it travels across Canada. And if people are interested in Digiwan, it's an exhibit of the 60 Scoop. And if people are interested, you can contact the Legacy of Hope Foundation for more information on that. I want to thank Albert for joining us today. Albert, we're almost to the end of our podcast here. Is there contact information that if people wanted to contact you about the 60 Scoop, do you have a number or a site?
Yes, those citizens of the Métis Nation who want to contact me on the work that we're doing at the Métis National Council, we have a website. It's so that's www.métis60scoop.ca, and my contact information is on the contact section of the website, and there is updates and information and resources for Métis citizens that live within the jurisdiction of the Métis Nation's homeland, and they can call me if they want information or they need some supports or be reconnected with the regional offices so they can provide some support.
Excellent. Last part of our podcast of Roots and Hoots is the Hoots part. And Hoots meaning something funny, a joke or something like that. We like to ask our guests tell a joke or tell a funny story, if you will. So do you have something funny, a funny story to tell us, Albert, or a joke?
I like to tell jokes, and sometimes they're okay, and sometimes they're not okay. But I like chicken jokes. Right. So here it is. So why did the chicken go to the seance? Why? To get to the other side.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's funny. That'll pass. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been talking to Albert Beck from the Métis Nation, and Albert, thank you very much. He's been talking about 60 Scoop and himself as a survivor and what he went through and the difficulties and the trauma he's gone through. I'm Gordon Spence, the host for Indigenous Roots and Hoots, brought to you by the Legacy of Hope Foundation. Thank you very much again, Albert, for being with us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you much.
Roots and Hoots is produced by the Legacy of Hope Foundation. For more podcasts like this, please visit our website at legacyofhope.ca.